Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Dan Siciliano. I'm a professor here at the law school and the faculty director of the Rock Center. Today we're going to do an hour and 15 minute or an hour and 11 minute, as the case may be, session on cybersecurity. I'm just going to jump right into it, introduce our panelists. But before I do that, let me tell you the format so you know how we're going to kind of proceed. We're going to go for about 45 minutes with kind of a discussion of three parts. And one is, what is the problem as we would describe it? And what's involved with issues around cybersecurity. The second part is going to be a discussion about the emerging best practices, the traditional responses, kind of the middle of the road. What do you do? How do you prevent it? And then the third category, where I hope to spend a little bit more time than the first two, is what are the out-of-the-box, or so-called out-of-the-box strategies, and what are the legal issues that might surround those. Then we're going to throw it open for questions, hopefully for 20 plus minutes. So with that, let me introduce our two panelists. So farthest to my right, Joe Grundfest, professor here at the law school, former SEC commissioner, senior faculty member of the Rock Center, not a stranger to any of you, I suspect. What you probably don't know is lately he's been studying cybercrime, cybersecurity, quantum physics, and all sorts of other interesting things in his spare time. And so he
anything to get away from the law.
Yeah,
anything.
Maybe securities law. I don't know. And so Joe will be discussing these relevant points and trying to hook it back to kind of obligations in the corporate governance sphere to a certain extent. I'm very happy to introduce George Kurtz. Some of you may know him if you are longtime Valley veterans or you've been following the security space. He is one of the leading thinkers in this space, having been both the CTO and senior vice president at McAfee and having led a lot of the emerging discussion around issues of security and cybersecurity. He's written now a seventh edition book about hacking exposed and what really goes on and what the trends are and what the real issues are. And now, most recently, he is the president and CEO of CrowdStrike, which you should look it up. You can also jump to their blog from there, and I read his stuff regularly. But CrowdStrike is a complicated company. It is in many ways a software company that is developing technologies and interventional strategies to reduce the exposure to and to respond to cybersecurity issues, but it's also, at the same time, has a service bureau which services very large companies in addressing and responding to cybersecurity breaches or issues as they emerge or after they've happened. I mention this in particular because on the one hand, we're lucky because George is really on the inside of this stuff. On the other hand, he will get vague on a few of the examples we raise because he might or might not be helping solve them. So I ask for your forgiveness in advance. With that, I want to hand it over to Joe with the following introduction, which is, Joe, there are a lot of views around quote-unquote cybersecurity. It means too many things to too many people. And for a lot of folks, it means, for example, the defacement of a website, the theft of social security numbers from a consumer website. But it seems like it is a lot more than that, and that is, to a certain extent, your recent focus. Can you lay the groundwork for us about the bigger problem of cybersecurity that we're talking about?
Look, if the problem is somebody hacking a site and getting a bunch of credit card numbers off a PlayStation server, we can live with that. Okay, we know how to we can prevent that and we can remediate right after the fact. Let me tell you three stories that indicate how much more serious this issue is. And one of the things that you learn when you start working the cybersecurity space, it's often difficult to point a finger and say, this definitely was an intrusion that came from X. But there's a country, and not to name names, we'll call the country Fredonia, all right? And this country, Fredonia, apparently is quite active and quite adept and quite good at engaging in some of these cybersecurity breaches. And two stories involving Fredonia and then one involving Iran. So Coca-Cola was going to be bidding on a major juice company, all right, that operates in Fredonia. And it turns out that certain servers that apparently were located in Fredonia successfully broke into Coca-Cola. And what information do you think that these Fredonian servers was looking for? What would they like to know?
Banking.
I'm sorry?
Banking.
Banking? The price. What they'd wanted to know is, what is the highest price that Coca-Cola would be willing to pay for the asset, so that when they sold it to Coca-Cola, there would be absolutely no money left on the table. Okay? Well, it turns out that Coca-Cola walked away from the deal, all right, and the deal did not happen. Nobody knows whether there's any relationship between the hacking, all right, the fact that the deal did not happen, whether the deal would not have happened anyway or what have you. But to the extent that you have valuable commercial information of that sort, you can expect that you will be hacked or people will attempt to hack you. Second observation, we're all aware of the notion of a physical supply chain. Well, there's also something that you can call an information supply chain. If you're a corporation and if you have information and you share that information with your investment banker, you share it with your consultants, you share it with your law firm, if somebody wants that information and if you've really hardened your corporate site, what are they going to do? Right, they're going to try to steal it from your lawyers. What they're going to do is they're going to look for the weakest link in the information chain. And the reality is, in today's world, law firms are often not, and I'll be polite, the strongest link, all right, in the information chain. If you can't get in through the front door, you check and if you see if somebody has left the side window open. So Freedonia has learned to hack law firms. There's more than one law firm that's been thoroughly hacked. And there was a situation where there was a bidder for potash resources up in Canada. A major global law firm discovered that it had been hacked. And in order to maintain confidentiality, what do you think they did? Anybody want to guess? They went to what? They went quiet. They went quiet. Well, not that far. Think about the movie Back to the Future. They stopped communicating sensitive information over the internet. And what did they use? They used what? Phone. Well, they used faxes, but not faxes that would feed into anything on the internet. They used the faxes that would just go over the old phone system, and they used telephone, and they used a company called FedEx. All right? So they basically said there will be no confidential information, all right, that will be shared over anything that's linked to the internet. We're going back to the future. We're going to do this deal as though it was 1979, all right? And that's the only way we're going to be comfortable protecting our clients' confidences. We have been so infiltrated. Oh, and just by the way, the ease of infiltrating a law firm's offices, if you have a global integrated network, and I'm going to defer to George, and suppose you happen to have an office in Beijing or Shanghai, all right, and it's tied into your server so that the people in China can see everything because you're a global integrated firm. Freedonia. How hard is that for the Freedonian authorities? How hard is that for the Freedonian authorities to basically read anything that goes on in the law firm globally?
That's trivial.
Trivial. All right? So just a little note. All right? If you've got a law firm and if you've got an office in China and it is hooked into, all right, the rest of your global system, the Chinese can read anything, all right, whether it's in your London office, whether it's in your Beijing office, or whether it's in your Buenos Aires office.
Joe, I want to ask George a follow-up question, and then I want to come back to your third point. And I should take a moment to point out on your in front of you, on your desk there, you should have received, and if you didn't on your way out, we'll get you some. It's a PowerPoint that Joe's used in a couple of different presentations, which will capture some of the examples he's giving. But I want to highlight something that you just kind of mentioned and maybe ask George to expand on it. And that is, the FedEx technology, let's call it, however retro, has an advantage, which is it's actually pretty hard to intercept. And if you do intercept it, you have to break into it. And if you do break into it, you want to steal it, you actually have to copy it. It's analog anyway, right? And then after you copy it, you have to put it back if you don't want people to detect that you did it. But if you change gears here and you imagine the best museum heists, right? We know some of the best museum heists are where the priceless artifact has been stolen and a replica has been put in its place, and for months, maybe years, no one notices. And then you go into the digital space. And in the digital space, you have this profound disadvantage that hacking and theft need not leave an empty space where there was wonderful information and it was taken. And so, George, could you highlight in the context of these 2 points the compounding of this risk, wherein the detection or lack of detection makes it even worse. Like, so at least someone can say, the Picasso, it's been stolen, and run screaming out of the museum, but does anyone ever notice? Or is that one of the own embedded risks in cybersecurity issues where you can be impacted and never know?
Well, that's a really good point. And first and foremost, thank you for being here, and what great panel to be on. In terms of your actual question, if you think about bits, they're free, right? And what we've seen is that not a lot of people notice. The bar is extremely low when you're working with big companies. Not that they're not trying hard, but a couple of 100,000 employees is hard to keep track of stuff and data. And in fact, we've been involved in responding to breaches where over the period of 4 months, 3 terabytes with a T of data has been silently exfiltrated out of an organization. So the copies are still there. They're all on everybody's PCs. Nobody's documents have been removed other than a copy made and basically compressed and then silently moved out of the network. And in fact, they even knew how much data, what threshold would trigger sort of an alert, and they actually dripped it out over a number of months. So yeah, it's a little bit different than the physical world, and it's a pretty scary proposition when you think about how much data is actually being moved from one place to another. Joe's a little bit more diplomatic than I am, so I do the translation from Toni to China, and one of the reasons that that I've started my own company here and that I've been in security for a long time is I've seen the intellectual property theft, and I've seen what it has done to companies. I kind of looked underneath the iceberg. I worked on a lot of the big investigations that you've seen, from Google to Night Dragon and a bunch of others, and it's a pretty scary proposition. And today is our election day, and I can tell you as a country, we've got a big challenge in front of us because really the proposition of us losing our competitive advantage because all of our IP is being sucked out by the truckload and moved to China, which, by the way, has the manufacturing base, is a real proposition. And we're not, that many years away in terms of history, right? So it's more than just a few companies getting hacked and, getting caught without having the right protections in place. I mean, it really is a much broader problem when we think about sheer intellectual property and theft of IP in the billions and billions of dollars.
Great, thank you. Joe, you had an
Yeah,
example,
and the other thing
which I
is,
think segues nicely.
there's a misconception that the problem is purely technological, all right, and that you've got a bunch of hackers, sitting somewhere in Fredonia that are hacking the rest of the world. There's a human factors component to this as well, and the human factors component is illustrated in the Aramco attack. And if you have a look at the first page of the handout, there's just one slide that summarizes it. It's called the Shamoon virus. Panetta Secretary of State described it as, quote, probably the most destructive attack that the private sector has seen to date. What happened August 15th, 2012, not very long ago, during a holiday, while virtually everybody was away at 11:08 a.m., a person who, quote, had privileged access to the Saudi state-owned company's computers. In other words, an insider. The Iranians probably had an insider at Aramco, introduced the virus. The virus attacked 30,000 workstations, 3/4 of all of the company's workstations, erased and overwrote crucial system files with an image of a burning United States flag. Saudi Aramco had to replace all of those workstations. Restricted remote access and large parts of their databases today are still offline. You can't get access to them through the internet. Fortunately, the systems that actually ran the wells and the production operations were on a different network. They appear not to have been impacted. And the interesting thing was that the attack did a great deal of damage, despite the fact that the actual technology used, which was simply a wiper and an image of a flag, was really extraordinarily rudimentary. And to the extent that there was any art involved here, you found a person with a sufficiently senior level of access to the system, a sufficiently senior sysop, who was able to introduce the virus into the system, and that person is probably no longer in country, if you know what I mean. They're probably on vacation back in Tehran. So there is a human factor here as well, and that is if you can compromise a sufficiently senior person in the network, you can either steal huge amounts of information that before no one person would actually ever be able physically to convey. Because if you're talking about stealing terabytes of information, you couldn't do that in a paper world. It would take trucks of information and people would see you doing it. Today, Bradley Manning, all right, on a disk can walk out of a military facility with quantities of information that would physically be impossible to do before. So ignoring the human factors and focusing solely on the technology misses a large piece of the vulnerability that we've created for ourselves by being able to compress information and carry terabytes around in a briefcase. George?
Well, I mean, I would concur. You kind of look at this, and can't go into all the details of that, but I'll just talk in broad strokes. It's not pretty when that many thousands of computers actually go down. And this, I think, kind of ushers in a bit of a new era, because this really was the largest attack that we've seen in terms of physically trying to damage the computers. The drives were actually damaged and overwritten. You know, there was some interesting things that were done in terms of kernel drivers that were signed and introduced into the environment that, you know, people have publicly talked about. But when you think about what happened here, this is sort of the you know, Hurricane Sandy of this particular company, because when 30,000 computers go out, you know, you can't go in, you can't even walk into the building because everything's computer access controlled. You can't turn on a PC, you can't print, you can't go to the cafeteria. I mean, you can't do anything for weeks on end. And, you know, everybody's waiting for the utility truck, which is IT, to come and, you know, roll out new PCs. So when they're not there, you really see what sort of destruction has taken place. And these sort of attacks have been on the mind of the U.S. government for a long time. In fact, there's been initiatives over the last year or so to work on securing BIOS, because if your PC BIOS is corrupted, the entire PC is pretty much useless and has to be reflashed. So I think this is a bit of a watershed event. We've seen destruction before, but not in this level in mass in terms of how targeted it actually was.
So, George, let me ask you a question. Suppose someone, for whatever reason it was, wanted to do the equivalent of a Shamoon attack on any corporation in the United States. How hard would that be?
It really isn't that hard. And
I was afraid you were going to say that.
It really is not that hard. The bar is so low. I mean, if you look at how easy it is, I mean, the simple sequence of events is a phish comes in, you get an email that looks like it's from the CEO, right? It looks like it's from someone senior or your HR department. Everybody clicks on it. Typically, it's some vulnerability in Adobe or Office. Office has gotten better. And then malware is silently installed, it connects back out. I mean, that literally takes a few seconds, and there's enough, you know, in a 5,000 to a 400,000 person company, you're going to get somebody to click on it and install it. And then after that, I mean, it's literally the Hacking Exposed book I wrote in 1999. It's just moving about the network and gathering the information. To be able, this attack wasn't all that sophisticated, although they did. The new thing now is to be able to compromise certificates so that it looks like it's a trusted piece of software. They actually leverage that in this particular attack. And then they zeroed out the master boot record and they put an image of this burning flag. You know, it didn't take a high level of sophistication to do that. And if it was really somebody who was, you know, not everything is as it appears, but if it was really somebody who was intent on, you know, doing mass damage across an infrastructure, it would be quite easy to do that, particularly when you think about some of the systems that we have that run our infrastructure. They're really not that well protected.
So let me ask, what are the traditional best practices? You've referred to the fact that the bar is so low. It sounds like there are steps that could be taken or should be taken, and I assume are taken by the most sophisticated and or paranoid of the corporate players in this story. What can be done? And if you're a director and maybe even chair the audit committee, and this like raises lots of red flags for you, what do you go back and ask about? Like, what are the questions you pose to your IT security people?
Well, I can, you know, the problem is we're using 1986 technology for a 2012 problem. Now, what I mean by that, I don't know how many people still use their VHS. You know, I'm not one of them. But that's pretty much the technology that we're using today in terms of blacklisting and antivirus. That's when it was developed, around that time frame. Now we're Blu-ray. So the models that we've created, unfortunately, you know, our ability to protect has actually gone down over the last 10 years. And the sophistication level of anything from a hacktivist to a nation-state actor has actually gone up. So you have this perfect storm, this area underneath the curve. So it's not as easy as just saying, well, install this or install that. You know, it's not just a technology problem, which which we're going to talk more about. It's more than just a technology component. But what I've always found, which is difficult when we think about directors, CIOs, CEOs, they ask the question. Some techie will come into the organization and say, we got hacked. And they'll give a bunch of gobbledygook about downloader XYZ and the registry, this, that. And, they don't really care about that. What they want to know is, from a risk perspective, is it a financial risk, operational risk, reputation risk? And how do you quantify it? And when they ask the question, what data was stolen, they get a blank stare. We don't really know. So where I'm going with this is, yeah, there's some technologies you can use. There's some decent recommendations in here. We can talk more about that. But you need to be asking the right questions, and you need to be getting the right answers from people in the IT department, because a lot of times they're going to give you the answer to the question you ask, but they're not going to give you the full picture. And it's getting that level of visibility on the network to what actually happened, what files were touched, what was moved out of the network. If there was a breach, that's important. And then obviously trying to prevent those targeted attacks from getting in. Personally, I think the industry has focused on the digital bullets, which has been the wrong equation, right? If in the physical world, if somebody's shooting at you, you're not basically saying it's a 45 or 9mm that goes by. You're asking the question, who's shooting at me and why are they shooting at me? So, my philosophy is to up-level it from, instead of looking at the digital bullets, which is the malware, to think about who the adversary is. Why are they trying to get into my company? Because I'm doing a deal with Coke, right? Because I want to buy a company in Japan. And what is their intent? So if you can link the what of the technological bullets that they're shooting at you to who's actually behind it, China, and what are they after? Well, they're after this, this negotiation documentation. Then it becomes a tenable problem. Then you can then deploy the limited resources you have to make sure that you safeguard those particular assets. Other than that, you roll into battle in the physical world and you just wait to get bombed. You don't know who your adversary is, you don't know where they're coming from, you don't know what their capabilities are, and it seems foolhardy to me to take that approach.
Well, taking a step back and, looking at it from two perspectives. We did a session with some of the leading law firms in the United States in conjunction with NSA, and the question was, what can you do to help at a law firm level? And if you think about it, the issue at law firm is particularly delicate because law firms have client confidential information. Law firms are under an obligation to maintain the confidences of their clients. And if law firms are hacked, important litigation information can be compromised, deal information can be compromised, and the like. And the reality, I think, is very simply as follows. If you are a law firm and you really need to maintain information as confidential, it should not be accessible through the internet. All right? End of story. You need to create a separate system that's hardwired, that has what intelligence people call an air gap. You can't get there from the internet. If anybody wants to work on a document, they have to come into the office. Does that mean that you can't edit the confidential brief while you're sitting at home in your living room and watching the football game? Yeah, that's right. All right, you're going to give up that convenience in order to maintain the confidentiality of the information. Now, maintaining that kind of a system within one office building is not hard. Figuring out how to do the link between New York and Chicago is a little bit more difficult, all right, if you want to stay off the internet, and you do, but it can be done, all right, it's a little bit more expensive. It becomes, as a practical matter, impossible once you try to go offshore. So maintaining that kind of a closed system that cannot be hacked through the internet is something you can do with an appropriate level of expense domestically within the United States. And that is probably the best way for a law firm to solve its problem. I don't know if you have any view on that.
Well, yeah, so let me, I actually have a couple of real-world examples, that certainly raises the bar, but let me give you a different perspective on that. So this is a real-world story, happened to the U.S. government. The Chinese actually showed up at the facility and basically spread out some USB keys on the ground. Mm-hmm. Lo and behold, I'm a government worker. I come in, I see a
free USB key.
A free USB key that I don't have to go through procurement that takes 2 months to get a USB key. I pick the USB key up, and now I walk in to my air gap network, and I plugged it in. And actually, this is how a big component of the U.S. government had gotten compromised. After that, they actually went around and they physically hot glued and super glued the USB ports, right? Because they didn't have at the time they didn't have a way to control.
But by the in my system there is no input or output device. Everything is just keyed in that way. You would not be able to.
Yeah, I hate to think of the law bill I would get.
Yeah.
I get big enough bills as it is.
As it is, but
Yeah, I mean,
that's the price you
you know,
pay.
that really is the, we're kind of going back and forth on this, but that really is the issue. It's this convenience versus, security, which is the ultimate conundrum that most people are in. But, if you look at, we'll try to get to my point here, though. I take a little bit of a different approach in that you should use all the basic hygiene, all the things that we talked about. But then there's really an emerging concept that's from a protection perspective or detection that's coming about, which is called hunting on the network. So companies are actually, the U.S. government does it, and companies are now doing this. They're hiring, ex-NSA people, ex-law enforcement, et cetera, to actually hunt on their network. So their sole goal is like a pack of dogs. They basically go out and they start looking for traces of adversaries. And their sole goal is to find out, if somebody's in the network and then who it is and then be able to minimize their damage. They've moved from the standpoint of, I'm going to be able to keep everybody out, and they now have embraced a different concept, which is they're going to get in with enough time or money. I just need to find them as quickly as I can and minimize their damage. So it is both the prevention and the detection component.
Let me ask a question which might be kind of rudimentary, but it might be helpful, and that is, can you explain where the use of encryption falls into these stories, whether they would have been better or worse or no different, depending on that? And of course, I mean, we've already alluded to kind of this social hack, which is, passwords are the kind of the weakest link of everything. So, but setting that aside for the moment, for example, a lot of law firms will send unencrypted email with unencrypted attachments of extraordinary importance, to everybody. Mm-hmm. And would any advantage be had if law firms took this more seriously and used encryption at rest for documents that are in areas that don't have a full air gap, and or used encryption in email, and why or why not? I mean, why would that help, or why wouldn't it help with it?
Well, it's a nice to have and it's a checkbox. So if your laptop falls off the UPS truck, it's encrypted, right? If you forget your laptop on the plane or whatever, your backup tapes fall off the truck, that's all good. The challenge that you have, and by the way, sending an encrypted email, it's 2012 and it's still a hard thing to do. Yeah. I mean, there's startups still trying to sort out how to make it easy because it's really a hard thing to do. And try to do it within Gmail and everything else, it's a disaster, okay? So it's not all that easy to do. Should it be done? Yes. The challenge that you have, though, is the encryption is at the lowest layer, really the physical layer. So when somebody gets in, they send a spearphished email and it exploits that computer, you're already logged in. So your system has already has the decryption key in memory, and it already has access to all the files. So it doesn't necessarily buy themselves, they don't buy themselves a lot from an adversary perspective, but it is basic hygiene in terms of lost items and in transit being intercepted.
And the other thing is there are different levels of encryption, and many encrypted documents with sufficient time and money, and that depends upon the sophistication of your adversary and how valuable your adversary thinks the information is, can be decrypted. You can break codes, and lowest level encryption, not that hard to break.
And I want to ask a follow-up related to that, and then I want to get to the cutting-edge stuff. So the follow-up is, could you expand a little bit on state actors as opposed to non-state actors? Because it has to do with, for example, in the encryption space. So unless you have extraordinary encryption, if you're facing off against a state actor, any of the kind of off-the-shelf encryption, if they really, really want to break it, they're going to pound away on it and probably break it. And so what do you mentioned something very quickly, which is you said kind of the something under the curve. So yeah. State actors is a part of that. How does that change the schema for how we should think about cybersecurity over the last decade?
Well, the state actor has really emerged as really the biggest threat. People used to look at, kids in the basement who create viruses, and it was a pain, and Slammer and, Code Red and other things kind of knocked out computers. But it's really the sophistication of the state actor. The reality is they don't even have to be all that sophisticated. I mean, we see some of the things that we track all the different Chinese groups that are out there. We see who's good and who isn't. And in fact, we can even see a shift change come in. One guy's working on Unix, the other guy's working on Windows, and then 5 o'clock a shift change comes in. Oh, by the way, during Chinese New Year's, no hacks. I mean, it's totally quiet, right? So we can see all this activity, but when you look at the sophistication, they only need to be as sophisticated as the lowest bar, right? The bar is pretty low, and I can tell you, just in the private sector, we have our own multi-core gaming system, which is like 4 GPUs strung together, and we can crack, it's almost like a government computer. It's ridiculous how much you can actually crack using a GPU. The reality is you're not breaking the encryption, you're just breaking the bad passwords that people pick. So my point is, some of the good guys are really good, but others are noisy because nobody looks. They just, and once they get in, they blend in. They look like an administrator. They just look like they're moving about the network. So my point here is that the bar is actually really low. There are some sophisticated actors, sophisticated plans that went into things like the RSA attack. I mean, that didn't happen over a day where the keys were actually compromised. It was an actual operation. This is not a hack, it's an operation. And it's multifaceted, multi-companies involved, et cetera. So from that perspective, I think it's pretty sophisticated. So a lot of times on the technology, it isn't as sophisticated as you would think. You move into things like Flame and Stuxnet, and you kind of look at what they've done, really, really sophisticated stuff. And that happened to have a specific purpose. But governments are, they're pretty good at what they do.
So if you take a look at the notion of the low-hanging fruit, if you have a look at the handout, page 6 of the first slide, there's a report that the Australian Department of Defense put out that lists 35 different techniques. And they said that as a practical matter, if you simply implemented their top 4 defense strategies, that would address at least 85% of the intrusions that the Australians were aware of. Now, I've talked to a bunch of people, not including George, and I've said, well, how good is this list? And people far more knowledgeable than I say, this is not a bad list. All right, if you spent hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars and hired a consultant to come in and say, what should we do? A material portion of the report that you would get would look like pieces of this list that the Australian Department of Defense has put out on the internet. So this is what I would call basic cybersecurity hygiene. All right, if you're with a company, if you're with a board of directors, you say, well, where do we start? Here's a list. You've got their top 4 mitigation strategies, many of which I would agree with George are really out of the equivalent of the 1970s. But you don't need to be state-of-the-art to address a large percentage of the attacks that you're going to encounter. Now, the unfortunate thing is, all you need is for one person to get through, all right, successfully, and you're hacked. So stopping 85% of the attacks means you're still going to be vulnerable 15% of the time. So there's a certain level at which George's approach saying, look, you can't stop all of these people from getting in. Instead, you need to be able to respond quickly, intelligently, and diabolically once they get in, may also be a necessary additional level over and above this basic internet hygiene.
I would agree with you. And if you look at that list, one of the items, the top item on there is application whitelisting. It actually isn't all that hard to solve this problem because if you can prevent execution and only allow what you think is known good, you can eliminate a lot of it. Unfortunately, the bad guys went and compromised Komodo and other
Whitelisting tools.
It's services so that they can now execute these sort of things. So it is basic hygiene, and it's really the computational feasibility of these attacks actually just favors the attacker, right? Because it's so hard for an industry to keep up with all of the bad things. Right now, there's about 100 million pieces of bad things that happen since 1986 or so. Most of it came over the last 3 or 4 years, and 100,000 new pieces of malware created every day. So, I mean, companies have to deal with 100,000 new pieces of malware. 55,000 are unique. So that's an untenable model, and gets to the point. Do the basic hygiene, but then you got to be thinking about how do you identify these adversaries and look for what they want to go after and their tactics.
I want to define application whitelisting real quick.
Yeah, sure.
You breezed over it, and then we're going to switch to the cutting edge tactics. Then we're going to throw it open to questions. So make sure I get this right. Application whitelisting is the idea that within the controlled environment, if someone actually double clicks on something, heaven forbid that disguised a .exe, which you're never supposed to do, and is going to execute something. If it isn't on the affirmatively allowed set of applications that can execute, it's going to be blocked, and that solves lots of problems.
That's correct. Okay. I mean, if you can prevent execution, because without execution, it's like oxygen to a fire. Without oxygen, you get no fire. Without execution, you get no infection. Right, so that is actually a pretty decent technology.
And it's a whole different session, which we won't cover now, as to why consistently lawyers and certain technologists, they just don't buy into these risks. threats. They don't respond to them. They don't act on them. It's a whole different. I'm looking at the Markula Center, Jim Bellasone here. Maybe we'll have them do a session about the ethics of sticking your head in the sand. But I want to switch to those who don't stick their head in the. No, that's a good ethics session, I think. But I want to switch to those that do decide to go really proactive on this, take all the best possible steps, they implement air gap strategies, they fight with everyday sessions against social engineering, they have snipers in the parking lot to pick off the employees who reach down to pick up the and everything. So what are the latest and greatest strategies? Then I want to talk about the legal risks potentially around them for what you're thinking about that corporate players and others, governments as well, can do.
Yeah, so that's a great segue. So one of the things that we've been really trying to pioneer at CrowdStrike is what we term offensive security, or some will call it active defense. People look at that and go, wait a minute, you're breaking into computers. No, we're not saying that. You have to really define what offensive security means. So when we think about the adversary, we think about how can we cause more pain to the adversary, and that means time and money. How can we make their job more difficult in doing what they do? Because as I said earlier, the premise is the bar is pretty low. So being able to leverage techniques like denial or deception or disruption makes it a lot harder for an adversary. So let me give you a good example. If we think to our computer science class, you've got 3 core tenets of computers, which is confidentiality, integrity, and availability, right? Now, one of the things that most companies are concerned about is the integrity of their data. If somebody comes in and modifies the data, they don't know whether the SAP system is up or down, right? That's a real problem. However, now, what if you turn the tables and you basically, because you had some advanced intelligence of what these attackers were doing, and you had an idea that they were going after the negotiation information and code, what if you started to feed them false information? Yes. So let me give you, it's a simplistic example, but it will illustrate my point. Everybody's after the B-2 stealth bomber plans, right? What if you fed them the wrong plans and it only turned left? That's really, really expensive. If they don't have an idea whether the integrity of the data they just stole is actually accurate, you've dramatically increased the cost. Okay, so these are the things that we're thinking about. And people go, wait a minute, this is like such a big problem, how do we deal with this? My prediction over the next 3 years, most major corporations will have a counter-espionage sort of intel unit that's actually looking at who's attacking that company and then thinking strategically about running an operation or a campaign against that particular adversary. Doesn't mean you can do it for everybody and do it all the time, but it starts raising the cost. So the idea is you have 2 houses on the block. One of them is full of pit bulls, one of them isn't. Where are the bad guys going to go? And if you can hit them in their non-scalable human element, that is, once they break in, how they move about, socially profiling individuals before they actually get in, creating command and control infrastructures, that's all non-scalable. Creating a new piece of malware is incredibly scalable. You don't want to hit them there. You want to hit them in the non-scalable component, and you want to disrupt what they're doing. So the idea is that if somebody came into your house, what legally would you be able to do in terms of making their life more difficult? And I know we're going to spend some time talking about that. I don't think it's just cut and dry. I think personally there's a lot of room within the law of what you can do legally. And that's one of the things that I'm trying to push the boundaries and not go outside the boundaries.
Well, I should mention, and I know you wouldn't bring this up on your own, so George recently hired kind of the FBI's head lawyer in this domain. Because this is, I think, a very complicated area to advise your clients, right? You've described feeding false information. Joe and I, as we were talking, you said, well, okay, that one sounds pretty good. But then the next question, I'd like us to comment on this legally, is feeding them false information, but embedded in that information is some sort of executable. And let's imagine they're not following the appropriate hygiene either, and they didn't whitelist their, applications. And they open that great schematic, ready to sell it to the highest bidder, and boom, on the benign side, it turns on their camera and mic and starts relaying information so maybe you can find them. Okay, that's interesting. Is that invasion of privacy? Does the jurisdiction matter? But on the less benign side, let's assume it overwrites their drive. It destroys things. It maybe melts down their computer in some sort of stuck-neck fashion. So is that allowed? So with those kind of examples from there, Joe, what are the contours of this? I mean, suddenly in defense, you've become the actor and you've done things.
There's a technical legal term, all right, for that, and that is who the hell knows. There's
I like that.
You like that?
Yes.
I mean, it comes from the original Latin,
But I normally get that
There isn't
answer, and it
that-
costs
right.
me $500 an hour, though.
Yeah, but no, you come to me, I'll just tell you, I have absolutely no
Okay.
idea. There's no precedent on point, and you can ask that question two ways. Number one, what's your theoretical liability? And then what's your practical liability? So let's assume that you believe that the information is being taken back to Fredonia, and what you do is you put the equivalent of an internet bomb in the information, so that when it's taken back to Fredonia, it fries a gazillion computers back in Fredonia. Even if you're legally liable, what's the probability that Fredonia is going to come to the United States and say, you know, we were busy stealing some of your information, and while we're in, you bastards, you stuck this bomb in the stuff and it blew up half of our computers in Beijing.
Yeah.
You know, I may look at it and say, now look, I don't know, you would be liable if they ever brought that action, but I really don't see them coming to court in the United States and making that claim.
I'll make a side note for an issue which we want to address, which is there is a sovereign state concern around escalation, right? Which
Well,
is
yeah.
it's a separate thing. So it's not what we're addressing, but
Right.
there's a legitimate concern that independent corporate actors can cause an escalation that we get nervous about.
Right, the phrase in Washington is you don't want to get kinetic, if you know what I mean,
Yeah.
all right?
Yeah.
You want to keep everything a battle of electrons, all right? You don't want people firing bullets.
But
all
let
right?
me make you analogize a little bit to the real world. So there are cases, for example, private banks that hand over money in satchels which are rigged to explode with paint, right? But it malfunctions and blows off the fingers of the perpetrator of the robbery, right? So we know how those cases go. To your main point, though, people aren't all that sympathetic. So there's kind of that component.
Right.
But in this story, would you allow a US-based, publicly traded company to rig critical information during a sensitive bid time? Because George's team has identified the 3 players out there who are likely to show up, right? And they've identified how to plant something that would be destructive at the information level. Not just the information you're handing them, but when they bring it back home, it starts to eat through all of their own stuff, those bad guys in their computer saving.
Number one, whenever you've got a witness at a deposition, you tell the witness not to respond to a hypothetical
Right,
question.
sorry, well, you know.
Okay? We would need to know much more information. Number two, the litigators in the audience will say, well, suppose your witness is an expert. You're allowed to ask experts hypothetical questions. Yeah, but if your expert has half a brain, you can spend a day trying to define all the parameters of a hypothetical necessary, all right, in order to be able to give a truly responsive answer. So it's a great question, and I could imagine some scenarios in which you'd say, go call George, all right, and we want to put a hand grenade in that information. And I can imagine other situations you'd say, go call George, we don't want a hand grenade in that information. What can we do short of a grenade?
And what are some of the things that can be done short of?
Well, you know, this is interesting. So let me just back up for 1 minute, because there's a reason why I hired Steve Jabinsky from the FBI, who helped write a lot of the laws and actually prosecute a lot of people. Right? He was the top cyber guy for all of the FBI. And it's to make sure that, you know, I don't get myself into trouble, okay? So I'm not a legal expert. I played one on TV. But, you know, there's a couple of things that I think are important. You know, what is the necessity of being able to, you know, get access to that data or do something? And then what is the proportional response? So necessity and proportionality, which I think is conventional, like legal law, right? Am I on the right
Sounds
track?
very conventional
Okay.
to me, yes.
So the idea of planting a bomb that actually blew up all their computers, you know, some may say that may not be a proportional response, but the idea of actually having the documents that somebody just stole self-destruct and beacon back out so that you actually know where the documents are may be proportional. Getting back to the point, I don't know. Maybe you know, but I don't know, right? So in any event, I think when we look at what can be done, I do think there are different degrees, right? And I'm certainly not one that's, you know, advocating scorched earth or, you know, going kinetic. But I do think, you know, die packing, which is something that we do in the physical world, a document so that it beacons back out. Somebody took your money, right? It die packs, and you now you know who took the money. Well, somebody took your document, and it begins to beacon out, right? And you know that it's sitting on this server or it's in this place, and then you can go and leverage law enforcement, if practical and possible, to go do something about that information. So I think there are degrees which people can, and mechanisms that people can actually implement.
This is an entirely, not entirely, this is as close to an exciting, unexplored area of the law as we're likely to run into all day. And to the extent that there are law students here with some technological expertise looking for topics to write about, all right, either for law review or what have you, knock yourself out. This is great, all right? This is a terrific research topic.
So that's my, again, I don't know, you don't know, but what I do know is I think over the next coming, several years, more people are going to try to test the boundaries of the law. And I can tell you from firsthand knowledge, I'm working with some of the largest companies in Wall Street who have sat down with me and said, hey, we're tired of getting punched in the head. We want to do something. Now, we're not advocating going out and blowing up computers, but they want to make it harder for the adversary. And the first question I say is, well, have you talked to your GC? Yeah, we actually talked to them. We told them, we want to explore this and we want to see what's practical within the limits of the law. So I'm starting to see a mind shift where people want to explore the boundaries because they're getting killed and they want to take a different level of action. So I think over the coming years we're going to see more about this, and we're going to need to see some of these events actually go to court and see what the outcome is.
That's a good moment, I think, to maybe switch to some questions from the audience. Go ahead and just walk up to the mics because we definitely want to capture the question on the mic. So we'll go ahead and just take a few questions. Go ahead.
Okay, let me go first. It's a two-part question. First part is if the hacking is so sophisticated that you don't even know you've been hacked until much later, and you don't know what's been stolen. What degree of certainty do we have knowing where the hacking comes from?
Yes.
First question. Second question is, if we really do know where the hacking has come from, couldn't you do some sort of a program like an anti-missile type of thing? Whatever comes in, you send a whatever back to the source?
Well, the second part is kind of what we were talking about. What's our response back to the source? I'll answer that in a minute. But let me take the first part. How do you find out who this is or if it's sophisticated? Actually, I said it's not really that sophisticated. The problem is most of the detection capabilities are pretty lousy. So you have unsophisticated adversary, sometimes sophisticated, but really lousy detection. So that's really why you have an issue. And being able to identify somebody, people always say, well, they're on the internet, they're anonymous. I can tell you we've identified. We've been called in because we have a particular expertise in attribution, and we've been able to go, that's the guy. Or in fact, that's the girl. It's not always a guy, I can tell you that for a fact. So we've been able to do that, and what we use, there's a, let me just, give me 1 minute because I'll give you the analogy. I took my kids to the FBI museum this year in Washington, and they had this thing. Before fingerprints, they used to fingerprint your arm, okay? Now it's digital fingerprint, So we're in the early stages of fingerprinting what the bad guys actually do and how they do it. And they actually have a common MO. It's not all that hard to always come up with attribution. So that's point number one. Point number two is it's not just one IP that you can block. I mean, they're coming from all over the place. So it's not as easy as just saying, if it came from that IP, I send the missile back. That's a little bit harder at this time.
Thank you. Question?
Yes. You talked about law firms as an example of being compromised in terms of their security probably getting at a low level. Who in the law firm is equivalent to the CSO or CISO that you would find in the corporations?
Well, the short answer is law firms are notorious for not being very well managed for a wide variety of reasons. And law firms are also notorious for having discovered multiple models of poorly managing themselves. So the answer to your question will differ law firm to law firm. And in some situations, the most common answers, because I've actually talked to a large number of law firms around a related issue, and the most common answer is they typically have a chief information officer whose job is generally to make sure that everybody can stay connected and that the systems are up, and they are penalized for anything that makes the system hard to use, and they generally place very little effort or attention on security. So if you think about the model, you get what you pay for, all right? And if you look at the incentive in the salary as to how you compensate the chief information officer at a law firm, having an active intrusion detection and prevention program is probably not a large component of the pay package. And I think that probably tells you everything you need to know from an organizational perspective.
Can you talk a little bit about the wisdom of taking a laptop that has data on it overseas or a cell phone that has data on it overseas versus maybe a blank?
Yeah, I can tell you, I take, wherever I go, I take burner phones or a burner laptop, and that's just a throwaway phone. Yeah, I'm not even allowed in China at this point, so I don't go there. But, you know.
You're not allowed in?
I'm on some list now. It wouldn't be good if I went over there.
Cool.
Yeah. It's not. But, yeah, I mean.
You're the first one I've met.
It's not, well, Dimitri, the guy that I started the company with, he's really on thin ice over there. But let me just tell you a couple of points, though. So if you're going to go overseas, you know, expect something to be compromised. If you're an executive going to China, you just don't take your stuff for two reasons. One is your equipment will be confiscated, and it's a matter of jacking in. Or two, if it's state-owned, think about this. They control the carriers, and the carriers can pretty much send, you know, any updates they want to the phone. The phone kind of listens. So you really have a problem on your mobile phone as well as your computing devices. So best advice is to just bring something that's disposable and doesn't have your data on it.
Right. So there's several companies that I work with where the rule very simply is if you're going to certain, and it's not just China.
Yeah, it's not.
Right. And if you're going to certain geographies, and in some situations, just to be safe, if you're leaving the country, you cannot take your company laptop or your company phone. We will give you a new laptop and a new phone, and when you come back, we will look at it, and we will all have a good time because we find all sorts of really interesting, where did that come from? You know, stuff on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Question?
Excuse me. I think it was about 1988 that President Clinton gave an impassioned speech, I think it was in Annapolis, about our vulnerability to cyber attack and losing important information for companies and for the country and for the combination of the two. That same speech, virtually, you put them side by side, I blank it out, I dare you to tell me who said which. President Obama said the same thing about 12 years later. And so the implication was that, and what they were talking about is the need for public-private partnership. That's the magical expression. And over that 12-year period or so, that public-private partnership, which is supposed to be a forum, confidential forum, where you can trade information on securing, how to defeat these attacks, on quick information about being on the receiving end of attacks, just failed to materialize. And I think there are a lot of reasons why. It's largely companies didn't want to participate. But what would you, as the legal counsel of these companies, have advised them? You have said, you've got to step up to the plate more than you are. Or, I'm with you, you've got to protect this sort of information. You can't be putting this out, even though it's supposed to be a confidential situation. You're talking about it in front of your competitors.
George, you want to take a look? Yeah, so a couple of points there. So first, I think information sharing is actually critical to solving this problem. The reason I don't think it's worked in the past is when you look at some of these companies, you know, and you get into FOIA-type issues, they're really worried about basically disclosing their information, having it FOIA'd, and then all of a sudden it's open for everybody to see it. That was one of the sticking points. In fact, InfraGard, which came out of the FBI, which was a public-private partner sharing effort, this guy Steve that works with me started it, you know, and it was moderately successful, but you had a lot of companies that didn't want to share it because of legal issues. What I found actually works is in like the information sharing and analysis centers, these ISACs, is really when the lawyers go over there and all the technology guys go over here, they actually huddle and they all share the information and they walk back to their company and say, yeah, nobody said anything. They just, keep the lawyers pacified by telling them nothing happened. But they just share all the information over there. So that's actually what I found actually works best. But I would agree, I don't think this problem can be solved unless we have good information sharing and we've got laws that actually help a company share that information. And that's why I actually give Google so much credit for in 2010 when they came out that they got hacked, because they were the first ones that said, yeah, we got hacked, here's what happened, and here's what we're going to do about it. And then 30 other companies, well, not even 30 got hacked, but 10 others came out and said they had a problem.
No, I think that's right. I think there's a level of denial that companies are in. There's a level of unawareness, and depending upon how you do the cooperation, there are issues of privacy that are also very important to many people vis-a-vis disclosing information to the government. Because in order for this to work, you in some situations have to allow the United States government to have access to your network. And some people think that raises serious civil liberties concerns. That's one of the reasons why we haven't had any legislation come out of Congress. There really boils down to a values question. How important do you think this threat is to the nation? And how much are you willing to trust the government to use the information that it gets for the appropriate purpose and not to misuse it? And I respect the fact that we've got 100 people in this room and we could have at least 100 different opinions on that kind of a social and value engineering front. I know where I come out, but that doesn't mean it should influence anybody in the room.
I will say, just as a footnote to that, I think, depending on your position here, and in particular if you read this article, there's going to be a lot more legislation coming down in terms of disclosure, financial disclosure around this. Right now, SEC has provided some sort of guidance, but not necessarily, law around it. And there's some broader laws that people try to subscribe themselves to. But if you look hard enough, you'll see companies that have disclosed, like Adobe, like Intel, and others, that said, hey, we've had a breach. So I'm just putting it on the radar because I think it's going to be more than, we're just going to be good corporate citizens and put it in there. It's going to be, if you don't put it in there, you're going to have a bunch of trial lawyers talking to you about why it wasn't in there. Next.
So it sort of seems to me that there's a lot of shareholder value might be being lost with all this IP being siphoned off into Fredonia and other places. I'm wondering if, this being the Rock Center for Corporate Governance, are there any routes in terms of holding companies accountable through their holding the board of directors and management accountable for breach of duty of care, for instance, through shareholder lawsuits or anything like that, to try to provide some more incentives for companies to take these threats seriously?
I'll seed it by saying there's new disclosure requirements, of course, which are promulgated by the SEC. But Joe, will that make a difference in terms of
as a practical matter, I think not, because the law is extraordinarily vague in terms of what's the standard of care. All right, you know what a standard of care is if you're doing a certain kind of surgical procedure. You've got some notion about the standard of care when you're building an automobile. There's basically nothing out there in terms of what's the standard of care when you're running an internal internet system, and what's a board of directors supposed to do with regard to assuring the security, all right, of that system. I think there are things that can be done, but they require other mechanisms of action. For example, the insurance industry is potentially a very good way of making some progress here. And one way to do it would very simply be to have the insurance industry get smart about selling certain insurance policies and to say, we're going to do smart underwriting. There's a lot of dumb underwriting that happens in the insurance industry where, if we price it at the following rate, we're only going to get hit, all right, to the following degree, and we'll make a profit, and we're not going to pay any attention as to the level of caution or care that the customer, puts in place. But if in order to get an appropriate cybersecurity policy, you actually have to pass a test or an audit that your insurer puts in place, then you've got a mechanism that a board of directors can actually use intelligently, because most boards don't have a single person on the board that know how to have a conversation with George, all right, or even know how to process anything that George would tell them. But if a board of directors says, gee, we'd like to have cyber insurance, and what you need to do is satisfy the underwriting standards that one of these three insurers or brand name insurers in the space put in place, the board can understand whether we succeed or fail at getting the coverage that we're looking for. So if you were to ask me how to design a market-based mechanism that can improve the level of cybersecurity in corporate America without going to Congress and raising all sorts of other issues, I'd probably look for a strategy along those lines.
Let me ask a technical follow-up to George, which is, Joe's outlined this idea, and I think it's a great one, that has the ability for directors to say, well, at least maybe we can look to certain types of certifications and the like. And right now, certain cyber liability underwriting does look towards, the old SAS 70 Type 1, Type 2 certification, and now the ISO 27001, I think, and 002. So I have a tactical question for you, like right now, if we're trying to give people takeaways. Are those certifications meaningful in any practical way, even if all you end up saying is, yeah, it goes from a low bar to a not so low bar?
Meaningful in terms of check the box and reduce liability, or meaningful in terms of actually keep the bad guys out?
Actually keep the bad guys out. So let us assume that you have some legal concerns and you want to reduce liability and check the box. But I actually am asking the meatier question, which is, if you wanted to take steps and someone says, you know what, you should get one of those certifications for your company, or more practically, this I know happens all the time, you mandate that your procurement for third-party SaaS vendors for critical services have to undergo some sort of evaluation, and it includes this. Are you actually doing anything, or are you just kind of doing a CYA because this is the best practice?
I think there's some good information in these practices, but, you take PCI as an example. I mean, PCI, people just do it to get certified and they get hacked left, right, and center. It's a nice to have, and it's better than not having anything. But what I found is that when you talk about certification, most companies will do the bare minimum just to get the checkbox, and they're compliant, but they're not secure. And you can be compliant, but not secure, and that's the challenge. So if you want to use that as a foundational element and build on it, hey, that's great. But I think anybody who just says, hey, we're going to get that certification and nothing more, it's a bit of a false sense of security.
So the takeaway for a board member, perhaps, or others, would be that if someone says, oh, no, we have all these certifications, you need not lose any sleep, that isn't a good answer.
That's what they're going to get told.
Right, but that's not a good answer.
What the question, if I'm a board member, I'm asking is, that's great. How do we fare based upon our industry peers? Okay, if you're in banking, you're held to a different standard than if you're manufacturing, and you spend differently on IT. So my question is, who's getting broken into more? The Citibank is a Bank of America. Are we spending the right amount of money? What's happening? How does that all work?
Right? And the short answer is you don't know. Right? Citibank isn't telling Bank of America how often it's been hacked and which approaches have been successful and the like.
In a lot of cases, it's hard to get at, but when you look at some of the, like the FS-ISAC, these guys, particularly in banking, actually share more information than you would think. But it's hard to get what does it mean? Is it 5 billion or 1 billion that was stolen? They're not going to get that. They're going to get, this comet group in China hit us and they were after that. Okay, great. But it's hard. But at least ask the question, what are we spending on security versus what somebody else is spending? And if you're spending a disproportionately less amount, I might ask the question, why? Are we that much better? Or
Sorry? Time for two last questions. We'll go here and then here. Go ahead.
Do you, excluding the standards, comparing to other groups, satisfying the laws, all of that outside, do you think you can make a case to a company to increase their security level because on the average, they're going to lose more money if they don't? Or do you think this is just war stories which you can scare a company, or you can force laws, but isn't really economically balanced?
Let me. I'm going to give you a real.
Does that make sense?
It makes sense. Let me give you a real world story.
Great question.
Great question. So I was with a big bank in New York, and they were doing something in China, and we were talking about all these issues, and they said, doesn't matter. because anything that goes over there, we just figure is compromised. And we've got a $5 billion opportunity. We'll lose $1 billion. We're going to make $4 billion. End of discussion. Next. That was really the conversation. So they were willing to make just a business decision on it. So, in that particular case, that was just simple math. In other cases, I've seen, this is a public case, a windmill company got billions of dollars of IP stolen, and then all the windmills they were making for China, basically the contracts dried up and they just about went out of business, okay? So you really have to ask the question, what's your IP worth to you? And if it's stolen, what does that impact? And in the case of the bank, they were like, hey, we still make $4 billion, not a big deal. Right, so it becomes really a risk.
So it's a case by case.
It's a case by case, in my opinion.
And are there now standard or accepted return on investment analyses that go into this type of analysis, or is there just not enough data to do that yet?
I don't think there's enough data. Unfortunately, security. We all talk about how bad it is. It's not very empirical. It's hard to get the information. There's not a lot of disclosure. So you got to look at the public cases that have come out where, you're losing billions of dollars because you didn't get the acquisition. You're losing mineral rights because China outbid you. Billions of dollars would happen in the oil and gas industry, right? If you start telling the story of what could happen in your industry and not worry about the technology, then I think you get people's attention and go, yeah, maybe I ought to pay attention to that.
Yeah, my comment falls right in line with that comment in that the audit committee's responsibility for risk assessment is one way of attacking it. To the extent that you identify within the corporation that this is a risk, under a good risk assessment program, you have two aspects of it. One is what is the likelihood of it occurring, and two, what is the extent of damage if it occurs. And if you do the matrix of those two things, to some extent, if you've got a good CIO and you've got good directors, they're looking very carefully at that. And they may not be able to pinpoint it, but you can give some idea of the risk involved, and that brings some attention to it. It's not an answer, but it's a...
I agree. It's one of the comments I made earlier. This security needs to be reduced into those risk criterias, right? Financial, reputation, operational, maybe a few others. And as a board member, it's asking the right questions. What are we doing in this area? And again, what are we doing versus our competitors? You're always going to get, the packaged up answer. But I think, if you know a couple of levels deep in terms of the questions to ask, it at least, makes sure that people are moving in the right direction. Because I've seen a lot of companies, you even tell them they're hacked, and they go, no, that's not us. Well, yeah, it is you. So it's being able to ask the right questions, really.
I think on that happy note, we're going to conclude and say thank you very much to our panelists, and thank you for